Hello, welcome to the Heartbreak Stories channel. I invite you to join me on a city walk and explore the complex family dynamics of this story. Let's go with me.
Today's story is about a man who was thrown out of his own home by the woman he loved and her mother and smiled while walking out the door. What they didn't know is that he had already prepared everything.
My mother-in-law called me a nobody while helping my wife pack my bags. I smiled, picked up my suitcase, and left. What none of them knew was that the house they were standing in, the money they were counting on, and the life they were celebrating never belonged to them at all. My name is Elliot Grayson. I'm 52 years old. I built a heating and cooling business from a second-hand van and a $4,000 loan from my father. By the time Claudette decided I wasn't worth keeping, that business had 2 commercial contracts, 14 employees, and a fleet of 7 vehicles. None of that was in her name. She never asked why. She never thought she needed to. That Tuesday morning in September started like any other. I came downstairs and found Sylvia standing in my kitchen, arms crossed over her linen blazer, one I'd paid for last Mother's Day. She didn't say good morning. She didn't even look at me directly. She looked past me, the way people look at furniture they're deciding whether to keep. Claudette came down the stairs dragging my large duffel bag. Not her bag. Mine. Already packed. I stood there at the bottom of the stairs and watched her set it by the front door with the same indifference she'd used putting out the recycling. "We need you to go," Claudette announced, not quite meeting my eyes. "Clifford's coming back to town. Things are different now." Clifford, the ex-husband she'd spent 7 years telling me was ancient history. Ancient history with a tan and a weekend bag, apparently. I looked at the duffel, then at Claudette, then at Sylvia, who finally decided to look at me, with that particular smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "You were never really one of us, Elliot," Sylvia said, her voice smooth and certain. "You're a nobody who got lucky. My daughter deserves someone who actually belongs in her world." The words hung in the air. I noticed Claudette didn't correct her. Not one word. I walked to the door. I picked up the duffel. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam anything. I just looked at Sylvia for a long moment and said, "I appreciate the honesty." Then I nodded at Claudette, one slow nod, the kind that means 100 things at once, and I walked out. What they didn't know, what neither of them could have known, was that my walking out the door was the last move in a game they never even realized we were playing. That house, never in Claudette's name. The accounts they thought were joint, restructured 11 months ago. Everything they assumed was theirs was sitting inside a trust they couldn't spell, let alone access. I loaded the duffel into my truck, a 219 Ram, not flashy but solid, and sat behind the wheel for exactly 1 minute. No music, no phone calls, just the sound of the neighborhood and the weight of what was about to happen settling into my chest like a slow exhale. In the glove compartment was a manila envelope. Inside it, 3 documents, 2 flash drives, and a handwritten note from Nadia that reads simply, "Ready when you are." I've been working toward this for almost a year. Not out of anger, not even out of spite. I'd done it because somewhere around the 11th month of watching my wife slowly disappear into a version of herself I didn't recognize, I understood that preparation wasn't pessimism. It was survival. I pulled out the driveway without looking back. Not because it didn't hurt. It did. 23 years is a long time to love someone, even someone who stopped loving you back somewhere along the way. But I cried my last tear about Claudette 6 months ago, alone in my office at midnight, looking at a photo of us from our honeymoon in Savannah. I let myself feel it then, all of it, so I wouldn't fall apart when it mattered. And right now it mattered. I dialed Nadia's number. She picked up on the second ring. "It happened," I said. There was a brief pause. Then her voice came through, steady and focused. "I'll have everything ready in 2 hours. Drive safe, Elliot." I set the phone in the cup holder and pointed the truck toward Arthur Finch's office on the other side of town. The game, as far as Sylvia and Claudette were concerned, was over. They'd won. They had no idea it had just begun. Arthur Finch's office smelled like old leather and black coffee, which, as far as I was concerned, was exactly what a lawyer's office should smell like. No motivational prints on the walls. No fake plants. Just floor-to-ceiling shelves, a mahogany desk the size of a small boat, and Arthur himself, 61 years old, silver-haired, reading glasses perched at the end of his nose like they'd given up trying to stay put. He was already waiting when I walked in. He took one look at my face and didn't bother with pleasantries. "She did it this morning," he said. Not a question. Packed my bag herself, I confirmed, dropping into the chair across from him. Her mother supervised. Arthur made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. He pulled a thick folder from his desk drawer and set it between us. I recognized it immediately, dark green, labeled in his handwriting, Grayson/Elwood Ridge Holdings. "Before we execute the final amendment," he said, removing his glasses and setting them on the desk, "I need to tell you something that came across my desk yesterday afternoon." He paused, choosing his words with the precision of a man who'd spent 40 years doing exactly that. Claudette retained counsel 3 weeks ago, a family law attorney out of Decatur. She's been asking questions about marital asset division, specifically about the house and the business. I kept my expression neutral. And her attorney made an inquiry about the property title on Briarwood Lane. Arthur tapped the folder. They were fishing, trying to determine what was jointly held. He let that sit for a moment. What's interesting is that the inquiry included a request to verify a signature on a home equity document from 2019. That landed differently. I leaned forward slightly. A signature she didn't forge. Correct. The document was legitimate. You signed it. But the fact that her attorney was examining it suggests they were looking for a way to argue the property was a marital asset. Arthur folded his hands. Someone advised her to start building that case months ago. Elliot. This wasn't a decision she made last week. I sat with that for a moment. 23 years. And she'd been quietly laying groundwork while I was scheduling HVAC maintenance calls and making sure payroll cleared on time. "Execute the amendment," I said. Arthur nodded, uncapped his pen, and slid the documents across. The final amendment to the Elwood Ridge Holdings Trust, established in 2003, 1 full year before I met Claudette, funded entirely from the sale of my father's business. The house on Briarwood Lane had been purchased through that trust in 2007. Claudette's name had never appeared on the title. Not once. I signed, clean and deliberate. Arthur countersigned, then pressed his notary seal with the quiet finality of a period at the end of a very long sentence. "It's done," he said. "The property is fully secured. No marital claim survives this structure." I exhaled slowly. Not relief, exactly. More like the feeling of setting down something heavy you've carried so long you forgot it had weight. "There's one more thing," Arthur added, picking up a separate sheet. During my review of the joint account history, I flagged a series of transfers from the past 14 months. Small amounts, 300 here, 500 there, moving from your joint savings to an external account I couldn't immediately identify. He slid the sheet across. I traced it. The receiving account belongs to Clifford Ansley. The name hit me like a cold draft. "Sylvia," I said flatly. Arthur nodded. "The transfer pattern matches her online banking schedule. She moved approximately $11,000 from your joint funds to Claudette's former husband over 14 months, likely structured to stay below reporting thresholds." I stared at the sheet. Sylvia, standing in my kitchen this morning in a blazer I'd paid for, telling me I was a nobody, while she'd been skimming my own money to fund the man she wanted to replace me with. "What are my options?" I asked. "Civil claim for conversion of marital funds," Arthur replied without hesitation. "Possibly wire fraud, depending on how the transfers were initiated. I'd recommend we document everything and file the civil claim as part of the broader separation proceedings. It puts significant pressure on both Claudette and her mother simultaneously." I nodded slowly. "Do it." I drove from Arthur's office straight to the other side of the city to a newer building in a quieter district, the address of the apartment I'd been quietly leasing for 11 months under Elwood Ridge Holdings. 3rd floor, corner unit. Nothing extravagant. Nadia was already there when I arrived, laptop open on the kitchen counter, 2 folders stacked beside it. She looked up when I walked in, dark eyes steady, a small nod of acknowledgement. "Arthur confirmed the amendment?" she asked. "Signed and sealed." "Good." She turned the top folder toward me. Because I found something this morning while cross-referencing the joint account statements you sent me last month. She pointed to a highlighted column of figures. Sylvia's been moving money to Clifford. I looked at her. Arthur found the same thing 20 minutes ago. Nadia's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted, a quiet satisfaction. Then we've got them from two directions. She reached for her coffee mug, and for just a moment, the late morning light caught the angle of her face in a way I noticed without meaning to. I looked away and picked up the folder. There was work to do. The apartment on Kellner Street wasn't much to look at from the outside. A red brick building, 6 floors, no doorman, no lobby artwork. Just a key fob, a working elevator, and the kind of quiet that costs more than people realize. I'd signed the lease 11 months ago under Elwood Ridge Holdings. Paid 12 months up front. The building manager knew me as a property consultant. Nobody on that floor knew my name. I set the duffel on the bed and stood in the center of the living room for a moment. Clean lines. No lavender candles. No decorative pillows that looked like they'd been arranged by a committee. Just furniture I'd chosen myself. A dark gray couch, a proper reading lamp, and a kitchen stocked with actual food. It smelled like nothing, and that felt like a gift. Nadia arrived 20 minutes later with 2 laptops, a portable router, and a paper bag from the diner 2 blocks over. She set everything on the kitchen table without ceremony and opened the router first. Encrypted network, she said, plugging it in. Everything we run goes through the proxy I set up in February. No trace back to either of our names. She'd thought of that in February. For months before I even told her what was happening with Claudette. That was Nadia. She planned for the weather before she checked the forecast. I watched her work, fingers moving efficiently across the keyboard, and I thought, not for the first time, that most people in my life had badly underestimated her. They saw a 32-year-old woman in practical shoes running errands for a heating and cooling contractor. What she actually was sharper than anyone I'd hired in 20 years of business, including the people with degrees on their walls. She pushed one of the laptops toward me. Log into the joint account. Last time, just to confirm what's still sitting there before we initiate the transfer. I logged in. The balance read $14,340. Transfer everything that originated from my LLC deposits, I said. Leave whatever came from her teaching salary. Nadia pulled up the transaction history and started cross-referencing. After a few minutes, she looked up. That leaves $1,890 on her side. Leave it. She paused just briefly. You sure? You could leave less. I'm sure. I closed the laptop. I'm not doing this to punish her financially. I'm doing it to make the accounting clean and accurate. There's a difference. Nadia looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite categorize, somewhere between respect and something more personal. Then she nodded and turned back to her screen. While she worked, I opened the second folder she'd brought. Inside were the compiled records of Sylvia's transfers to Clifford. 31 transactions over 14 months, originating from a tablet register to Sylvia's home address, landing in an account held by Clifford Ansley at a bank in Atlanta. I'd known Clifford was back in the picture. What I hadn't known was that Sylvia had been funding him, sending my money I'd earned running service calls in July heat and February ice, to a man she'd handpicked to replace me in my own home. I laid the pages out on the table side by side and studied them the way I used to study HVAC schematics, looking for the pattern, the intention underneath the numbers. Nadia glanced over from her laptop. You've got that look. What look? The one where you're 3 steps ahead and deciding whether to say it out loud. I almost smiled. Sylvia didn't just approve of Clifford coming back. She engineered it. Those transfers started 14 months ago, right around the time Claudette started changing. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, that means the decision to end your marriage wasn't Claudette's. Not entirely. Her mother decided first. Claudette just agreed. I gathered the pages and stacked them evenly. Arthur Finch would add them to the civil claim file tomorrow morning. Wire fraud. Conversion of marital funds. 2 separate angles pressing on the same people simultaneously. I went to the window and looked out at the street below. The afternoon was ordinary. A delivery truck double parked, a woman walking a terrier, someone arguing with a parking meter. The the city entirely indifferent to the fact that my marriage had ended this morning. Behind me, I heard Nadia close her laptop. "Transfer's done," she said. "Account restructured. You're clean on your end." "Thank you." There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just present. The kind of silence that exists between two people who've spent enough time together that quiet doesn't need filling. "You eat anything today?" she asked. "Coffee." She pushed the diner bag toward me across the table. "Eat something, Elliot. You've got a long week ahead of you." I looked at her when she said it. She was already pulling out her own container, not looking at me. But the fact that she'd thought to bring 2 meals that she'd known without being told that today would be the kind of day where a man forgets to eat landed somewhere I didn't expect. I sat down across from her and opened the bag. Frank showed up on Thursday without calling. That was how Frank operated. No advance notice, no asking if it was convenient. He just appeared, 6'1", flannel shirt, the same worn Carhartt jacket he'd owned since the Obama administration, and stood at your door like he'd been meaning to stop by since last Tuesday. I opened the apartment door, and he looked me over once, the way older brothers do when they're checking if you're actually okay or just saying you are. "You look like you slept," he said. "I did. Good." He walked in, glanced around the apartment, nodded once in approval, and set a 6-pack of decent beer on the counter. "Nice place. Clean. Sit down, Frank." He sat on the couch and waited. That was the thing about Frank. He never pushed. He'd driven 40 minutes from Marietta without an invitation and would sit there all afternoon without asking a single question if that's what the situation called for. I poured us both a coffee. It was only 11 in the morning. The beer could wait, and settled into the chair across from him. "She did it Tuesday," I said. Frank wrapped both hands around the mug. "Her mother helped, supervised the whole thing." He made a sound low in his chest. Not anger exactly, something older than anger. He met Sylvia exactly 4 times over 23 years. Each time, he'd shaken her hand, been polite, and told me afterward, in private, that the woman looked at me like I was a lease she was waiting to let expire. I told him he was reading too much into it. "You remember what you told me after my engagement dinner?" I asked. Frank looked up. "I told you the mother was the one marrying you, not the daughter." "You did." He was quiet for a moment. "I also told you I hoped I was wrong." "You did that too." I gave him the outline. Not everything. Not the full legal architecture, but enough. The trust. The property title. Arthur's findings about Claudette's attorney and Sylvia's transfers to Clifford. Frank listened without interrupting. He had that quality, rare in most people, rarer in men, of being able to hear something fully before responding. When I finished, he set down his mug. "The money Sylvia moved," he said slowly. "That's not just disloyalty. That's theft, Elliot. Arthur's filing the civil claim tomorrow." Frank nodded, studying the middle distance. Then he said, "You doing this alone?" "The legal side, the financial side, all of it." "Nadia's helping." Something moved across his face. Not suspicion, just attention. "Roy's daughter." "Right. She's sharp," Frank said simply. "Always has been." He picked up the mug again. "You've got Finch, you've got her. What do you need from me?" That was Frank. Straight to the operational question. "Nothing right now," I admitted. "I just needed somebody who already knew I wasn't the problem." He looked at me steadily over the rim of his mug. "You were never the problem." We stayed like that for a while, 2 brothers on opposite sides of a small table, the city humming outside the window, the morning passing without ceremony. Frank stayed for 3 hours. We didn't talk about Claudette the whole time. We talked about the Braves, about a plumbing issue Frank had in his basement, about a hiking trail up near Blue Ridge that we'd been meaning to do for 4 years and somehow never managed. When he finally stood to leave, he pulled on his jacket and paused at the door. "The trust," he said quietly. "I knew about it from the start, didn't I? You witnessed the original filing. 2003. He nodded, one short decisive motion. "Then you were ready before she even started the game." I was. Frank opened the door, then looked back. "Don't wait 4 years for that hiking trail, Elliot." He left without waiting for an answer. I stood in the doorway and listened to his boots on the stairwell until the sound disappeared. Then I went back to the table, opened my laptop, and got back to work. Leah called on Friday afternoon. I was on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching a thunderstorm build over the tree line to the west when my phone lit up with her name. I've been waiting for this call. Not looking forward to it, but waiting. She didn't even say hello. Her voice came through hot and tight, the way it got when she'd been holding something in for too long. Dad, what did you do? Mom is completely falling apart, and Grandma Sylvia is telling everyone you took everything and locked them out of their own house, and I don't even know what's real right now. I let her finish. Then I said, calmly, what did your mother tell you happened? She said you blindsided her, that you've been hiding money and manipulating everything, and she had no idea any of it was coming. I watched a fork of lightning touch the hills in the distance. Leah, I want you to think about the morning you found out I'd left. Did your mother seem blindsided to you, or did she seem prepared? Silence. She was dressed, Leah said slowly. Like, actually dressed. And Grandma was already there. Your grandmother was there at 7:15 in the morning, Leah. On a Tuesday. Another silence, longer this time. I need you to understand something, I said. I'm not going to argue your mother's case versus mine. But I'll tell you this, everything I did legally, transparently, and with documentation going back 20 years. I didn't hide anything that was mine to protect. Leah's voice shifted, less heat, more confusion. She said there was a prenup. There was. Signed in August of 2009. Your mother's attorney reviewed it before the wedding. She told me she never signed anything like that. I can have Arthur Finch send you the original with her signature on it, if you'd like. The line went quiet for a long moment. I heard her breathing change, that specific rhythm she'd had since she was a little girl when she was trying not to cry. I don't know who to believe, she admitted. You don't have to believe either of us right now, I said. Just don't close any doors yet. We hung up without resolution. That was okay. I hadn't expected resolution. I'd expected exactly this. Leah was 22 and she loved her mother. The truth would find its own way to her. I just had to make sure I was still standing when it did. 3 days later, Jared called me. I knew Jared, Claudette's sister's son, 24 years old, working in logistics, quieter than the rest of that family by a factor of 10. He'd always treated me decently. I'd helped him land his first job out of college through a contractor I knew. He wasn't the type to get involved in family drama without a reason. Mr. Grayson, he said, his voice low like he was calling from somewhere he didn't want to be overheard. I need to tell you something, because I don't think it's right what's happening. He told me he'd found something in his Aunt Claudette's bedroom. Not snooping, he said, just helping move furniture, and he hadn't known what to do with it. A journal, small, dark blue, tucked behind books on a shelf. He'd opened it by accident, read one page, then kept reading. Entries going back 3 years. He described what he'd seen without reading directly from it. Dates, references to Clifford, to plans, to conversations with Sylvia about timing and how to make the transition clean. One entry from 14 months ago mentioned, in Claudette's own handwriting, that Sylvia had started moving funds to sea, so he'd be ready when the time came. My jaw tightened. Sylvia hadn't just approved the plan. She was written into it by name. Jared, I said carefully. Does Leah know about the journal? No, sir. But I think she should. Can you get it to her? A pause. Already did. I left it on her kitchen table this morning with a note that said she needed to read it. I exhaled slowly. I hadn't asked him to do that. He'd done it because it was right, and because 24-year-old kids with a decent conscience sometimes do the right thing before anyone tells them to. Thank you, I said. That took guts. You helped me when you didn't have to, he replied simply. Figured I owed you one. He hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment, then set it face down on the table. 40 minutes later, Leah called back. She wasn't hot this time. She wasn't tight. She just sounded wrecked, the way a person sounds when something they believed with their whole chest turns out to be constructed. Dad, her voice barely held together. I read it. I know. She planned this. For 3 years. She was already. Her voice faltered completely. Leah, I kept my voice steady because one of us had to be. Come stay at the apartment this weekend. We'll talk. Face to face. A long pause. Then okay. She showed up Saturday morning with a duffel bag and red eyes and sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours. We didn't solve everything that morning, but when she left, she hugged me at the door, The kind of hug that says I see you now without needing the words. That was enough to work with. Clifford Ansley showed up on a Wednesday night, and I knew it wasn't going to be a conversation. Nadia had texted me at 9:45. Heads up, Clifford's been at Callahan's bar since 7. Jared spotted him, said he's been loud and drinking steadily. Might want to keep your door locked. I appreciated the warning. I didn't take it as seriously as I should have. At 10:20, the building's exterior camera, one I'd had installed 3 weeks after signing the lease, picked up a dark blue pickup parking crookedly across 2 spaces in the lot below. By 10:30, someone was hammering on my door with the flat of their hand, not knocking. I went to the door, looked through the peephole, and there he was. Clifford Ansley, 49 years old, 6 foot, built like a man who used to be athletic and had spent the last decade reminding himself of that fact. His collar was open, his eyes were glassy, and he was carrying the specific energy of a man who'd convinced himself, somewhere around his 4th drink, that he had a grievance worth settling. I opened the door. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped forward with his right arm already moving a wide, telegraph swing aimed at the left side of my face. I played baseball through high school and college. Reaction time doesn't fully leave you. I stepped left, pulled my head back, and the swing went past me close enough that I felt the air move. His momentum carried him forward, and he hit the doorframe with his shoulder, then stumbled sideways into the hallway wall and went down hard on one knee, catching himself with both palms. He made a sound, half grunt, half something he didn't intend to make, and stayed there for a moment. I stood in my doorway and looked at him. He was breathing heavy. His right hand was pressed flat against the hallway baseboard. He'd hit the wall with enough force that I could see from the way he was holding himself that his knee was going to be painful tomorrow. "Clifford," I said evenly, "what exactly did you think was going to happen here?" He looked up at me, and for a moment the bluster was gone. Just a man on the floor of a stranger's hallway, realizing the sequence of decisions that had put him there. Then the anger came back. He started pushing himself upright, jaw set, pointing a finger in my direction. "You think you're so smart," he said, voice rough. "You think all your legal garbage is going to... You don't know who you're dealing with, Grayson. Claudette is done with you. This is done. You need to walk away from all of it and let go." I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "I'm going to say this once. You came to my home. You swung at me. You missed. You're on the ground." I paused, and everything you just did is on camera. That stopped him. His eyes moved instinctively to the small device mounted above the hallway exit sign, the one he clearly hadn't noticed on the way up. "Building security cameras," I added. "Exterior lot, too. Time stamped. They caught you from the moment you parked." I uncrossed my arms. "You should probably go home, Clifford. Get some ice for that knee."
This man just got attacked in his own home and didn't lose his cool for a single second. That's a man who knew exactly who he was long before any of this started.
He stood up fully, and for a second, I genuinely didn't know which way it was going to go. Then whatever momentum he'd walked in with seemed to drain out of him all at once. He pointed at me once more habit than threat, muttered something I didn't catch, and turned toward the stairwell. He limped slightly on the right leg. I watched him go, then stepped back inside and closed the door. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. Then I pulled out my phone and sent 2 messages. One to Arthur Finch. "Clifford Ansley attempted to assault me at my residence tonight. Camera footage available. Advise on protective order." One to Nadia. "He came. He swung. He missed. We have it on tape." Her reply came back in 40 seconds. "Of course we do. You okay?" I typed back, "Fine." "He's not." 3 dots appeared, then her message. "Good." I set the phone on the counter and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady, not because the moment hadn't been real. It had, but because there's a particular kind of calm that comes from knowing you handled something without losing yourself in it. The footage would go to Arthur in the morning. The protective order application would follow. Clifford Ansley had just handed me one more document for the file. Some men, when they feel cornered, come out swinging. I learned a long time ago that the better move was to simply not be where they expected you to be. Roy called on a Monday morning and didn't waste time getting to the point. "Elliot, I need to step back for a while." His voice was careful, measured, the tone of a man who'd rehearsed the conversation before dialing. My wife's been getting calls from people in Claudette's circle. There's talk going around, and with our joint contracts up for renewal next quarter, I can't afford the optics right now. I was standing in my kitchen. I set down my coffee mug without a sound. I understand, I said. It's not personal, Roy. I kept my voice level. I said I understand. No hard feelings. He exhaled, clearly relieved I hadn't pushed back. We ended the call politely, and I stood there for a moment looking at the wall. 14 years. We'd built 3 major commercial contracts together, replaced roofing systems on 2 county buildings, and shared a booth at the Atlanta Trade Expo every spring for over a decade. And one social pressure campaign from Claudette's book club network had spooked him in under a week. I picked up my mug and went back to work. I didn't call him back. I didn't send a message. I just adjusted the project timeline and noted the gap. Some people need to see how things land before they decide where they stand. I could respect that, even if I didn't admire it. 2 days later, Nadia forwarded me a tax filing document she'd flagged during a routine background check she'd been running on the key players in Claudette's circle. Sylvia's name appeared as a listed officer on a small property holding company, Terracegate Properties LLC, which had filed amended returns for 3 consecutive years, each amendment quietly reducing declared rental income by amounts that straddled the reporting threshold. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was exactly the kind of pattern that looks like paperwork error until an accountant or an IRS auditor decides to look twice. I forwarded it to Arthur Finch with a 1-line note. For the file. Don't use it. Just report to the appropriate department and let the system do its work. Arthur replied within the hour. Already drafted the referral. Anonymous tip to the revenue department. Clean hands on our end. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly. More like the particular quiet that follows when you realize you didn't have to do anything dramatic. You just had to point a flashlight at what was already there. The following Thursday, Roy called again. I heard about the footage, he said, without preamble this time. Clifford going to your place, and look, Elliot. I made a mistake pulling back. I panicked. That's the truth. I let a beat pass before answering. What changed? Wendell from Dryden County reached out. Said he saw Finch's protective order filing in the court records. It's public, and that Clifford's facing a restraining order hearing next month. He paused. Claudette's people are going quiet. And I started thinking about what I actually know about you versus what I was being told. And I know you. 14 years. You've never once cut a corner on a contract or left a partner holding the bag. His voice was quieter now. I'm sorry I flinched. I thought about it for exactly the amount of time it deserved. Come by the apartment Saturday morning. Bring coffee. We'll talk. I'll be there. I set the phone down and noticed Nadia looking at me from across the table, one eyebrow slightly raised. Roy, she asked, coming back around. She tilted her head, considering. Took him about 10 days. Some people need to watch which way the wind's blowing before they commit to a direction, I said. And some people, she replied, returned her laptop, just need to be reminded who they're actually dealing with. She said it lightly, without looking up, but it sat with me longer than a light comment usually does. I found myself watching her for a moment, the way she worked, the precision of it, the steadiness, and I caught myself and looked back at my own screen. She was right, of course. She usually was. It was 11:47 at night when Claudette called. I know the exact time because I was still at the kitchen table, reviewing a supplier contract, and I glanced at the clock 30 seconds before the phone lit up. I looked at her name on the screen and set down my pen. I let it ring 3 times. Then I picked up. She didn't open with anger. That was the first thing I noticed. No edge, no prepared speech. Just her voice, quieter than I'd heard it in years, stripped of the social polish she usually kept running like background software. I didn't think you'd answer, she said. I almost didn't. A pause. Are you sleeping? Working. Of course. A small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. You're always working. I said nothing. I learned a long time ago not to fill silences that weren't mine to fill. I found out about Sylvia, she said finally. The transfers to Clifford. Arthur's filing. Another pause, heavier this time. I didn't know she was doing that, Elliot. I wanted to know that. I didn't ask her to. I sat with that for a moment, turning it over. Whether it was true was a separate question from whether she believed it was true. Claudette had a talent for not knowing things she didn't want to know. It doesn't change the legal picture, I said. I know. Her voice dipped. That's not why I called. Then why did you call? A long pause. Long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then, I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Any of it. I thought you'd. I don't know what I thought. That you'd negotiate. That you'd try to hold on to something. I held on for a long time, Claudette. I know you did. She said it quietly, and I believed her. Elliot, I'm not asking for anything. I'm not trying to change what's happening. I didn't realize how far I'd gone until I was already there. Her voice wavered for just a moment before she steadied it. I never actually thought you'd walk out without looking back. I looked back, I told her. I just didn't stop. Silence again. I stood and went to the window, looking out at the dark street below. You're going to be fine, she said finally. It wasn't a performance. It sounded like something she actually believed. You've always landed on your feet. So have you, I replied. You'll figure out what that looks like now. She didn't answer that. After a moment, she said, okay, in the small, final way people say it when they know a conversation has reached its natural end. Good night, Claudette. Good night. The line went quiet. I set the phone face down on the windowsill and stood there looking at the street for a long time. A car passed below. A light went on in the building across the way, then off again. I thought about 23 years, about what they'd actually contained, the good parts, and they existed alongside the slow erosion that I'd noticed and explained away and filed under this as just how marriages go. I've been wrong about that last part. Some things are worth explaining away. Some things are worth paying attention to. My phone buzzed. Nadia, checking in late, as she sometimes did. You still up? Found something on Clifford's hearing date. Finch should know tonight. I almost smiled. 11:58 at night, and she was still working the file. Send it, I typed back. I'll forward to Arthur. A second later, already sent to both of you. Get some sleep, Elliot. I looked at that last line for a moment longer than necessary. Then I closed the window app, picked up my contract, and went back to work. Arthur Finch scheduled the meeting for a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. My apartment. Neutral ground. Except it wasn't neutral, and everyone in the room knew it. Claudette arrived first, 3 minutes early, which surprised me. She was dressed conservatively, dark slacks, a gray blouse. None of the performative elegance she'd favored when she still thought appearance was leverage. She looked tired in a way that makeup couldn't fully address. Sylvia came in 2 minutes later, moving with the careful deliberateness of a woman who decided to project control she no longer had. She scanned the room the way she always did, cataloging, calculating, and her eyes landed briefly on the notary seated at the corner of the table before moving to me. Elliot, she said, in that tone she reserved for people she considered below her ceiling. Sylvia, I replied, and gestured to the chairs across the table. Arthur sat to my left, folders open, pen ready. Nadia was in the kitchen, technically making coffee, actually present. Sylvia settled into her chair and folded her hands on the table. I assume this is where you make your demands. This is where I present the executed documents, I said. There are no demands. The legal structure is already in place. Arthur slid the first folder across. Sylvia reached for it before Claudette did. Old habit. She opened it, read the first page, turned to the second. Her expression didn't change immediately. She had too much practice at that. But somewhere around page 3, the stillness in her face became a different kind of stillness. The kind that means a person is recalibrating everything they thought they knew. The property was never in the marital estate, Arthur said, calmly and without glee. The trust predates the marriage by 6 years. Every asset acquired through the trust carries the same protection. The civil claim for conversion of marital funds has been filed and accepted. The Revenue Authority referral for Terrace Gate properties is already under review. That last part landed on Sylvia like a change in air pressure. Her chin came up slightly. That's harassment. That's an anonymous tip to a public agency, I said. They make their own decisions about what to investigate. Claudette hadn't said a word. She was looking at the folder, not reading it anymore, just looking at it. The way you look at something when the information is already sunk in and what's left is just the weight of it. Then, Unexpectedly, Sylvia went still. Her hand, which had been resting on the table, moved to her chest. She exhaled in a short, tight sequence, and her color shifted, not dramatically, but enough. I stood immediately. Nadia! Nadia was already moving from the kitchen. I called 911 and stayed on the line while Nadia guided Sylvia to a more reclined position in the chair and checked her pulse. Claudette was on her feet, one hand on her mother's arm, the fear on her face entirely real. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. Sylvia was conscious and stable. High blood pressure, they said, stress-related episode, not cardiac. They took her for evaluation anyway. I stood on the sidewalk outside the building while the ambulance pulled away, and Claudette stood beside me, not quite next to me, watching it go. "You didn't have to call them," she said quietly. "Of course I did." She looked at me for a moment. Something moved across her face that I couldn't name and didn't try to. Then she turned and walked toward her car without another word. The meeting didn't resume that day. It didn't need to. The documents were already executed. The transfer of the Briarwood Lane property to the Millbrook Veterans Housing Initiative was complete, renovation scheduled for 6 weeks out. The civil claim against Sylvia was active. The divorce proceedings would proceed on the established legal structure. I went back inside. Nadia was cleaning up the coffee cups, moving quietly around the kitchen. "You okay?" she asked without turning. "Yeah." I set my jacket on the chair. "You?" She turned then, and for a moment we just looked at each other across the kitchen, the table between us, the afternoon light coming through the window at a low angle, everything quiet. "That went about as expected," she said. "Sylvia included?" A small, careful smile. Sylvia slightly exceeded expectations. I almost laughed. It was the first time that day I'd come close to it. She went back to the coffee cups, and I stood there watching her for exactly as long as I could justify before I picked up my jacket and told her I'd be back in an hour. 3 months passed the way months do when you're busy. Not slowly, not quickly, just full. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning with considerably less drama than the marriage had produced. Arthur Finch called me as I was driving to a job site, told me it was done, and I said thank you and kept driving. The legal structure held exactly as designed. Claudette walked away with the contents of her teaching retirement account, her vehicle, and $1,890 in the joint account I'd left untouched. The civil claim against Sylvia was settled out of court. She paid back the $11,000 in transfers plus legal costs, and the Revenue Authority investigation into Terrace Gate properties continued independently of anything we'd done. Clifford Ansley faced a restraining order hearing the following month. He arrived with an attorney, and the footage from my hallway played for the judge in full. The order was granted. I haven't seen him since. Roy was back by the second week. We rebuilt the contractor schedule for the county buildings and added a third commercial account in November. He brought coffee to the Saturday meeting like I'd asked, and we didn't talk about the 2 weeks he'd stepped back. Some things are better acknowledged once and then set aside. Leah came around slowly and completely. She spent 3 weekends at the apartment over those 3 months, and we built something new out of the wreckage of what had been assumed, quieter than before, more honest, better for it. She still loved her mother. I didn't ask her not to, but she'd read the journal, and she knew what she knew, and she'd made her own peace with it on her own terms. Jared got a promotion at his logistics company in October. I sent him a brief congratulations text. He replied with a thumbs up and one line. "You deserved better, Mr. G." I thought that was just about right. On a Friday in December, I was at the apartment when Nadia knocked. She had a key, but she knocked anyway, which was one of the things about her I'd noticed without ever commenting on. She came in with Thai food and a folder of year-end financials for Elwood Ridge Holdings, and we worked through them at the kitchen table the way we'd worked through everything that year, efficiently, without wasted motion, the two of us in a rhythm that had developed without either of us designing it. When the work was done and the containers were pushed to one side, she didn't leave right away. She went to the window and stood there looking at the city lights the way I sometimes did late at night, and I watched her from the table without saying anything. "You seem different," she said without turning. "Different how?" "Lighter." She turned then and looked at me directly, with the particular honesty she'd always had and never bothered to soften. "Like something you were carrying for a long time is gone." Something is, I said. She looked at me for a moment, then back at the window, then at me again. What happens now? It was a genuine question. She asked it the way you ask things when you're not sure what answer you're hoping for, and you've decided to ask anyway. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. I stopped beside her, not far, not close, and looked out at the lights below. I built something new, I said. Something that belongs to me from the ground up. I felt her look at me from the side. I didn't turn right away. When I did, she was already watching, and neither of us looked away. I might know someone who'd help with that, she said quietly. I looked at her, really looked the way I'd been not quite allowing myself to do for months. And I didn't say anything clever or deflect or change the subject. I know you would, I said. We stood there at the window for a while after that. The city moved below us, indifferent and alive. Nothing was decided in words that night, but something had settled in a place that hadn't been there before, solid, unhurried, real. That was enough to build on.
Some people mistake your silence for weakness. Elliot never argued, never begged, never raised his voice, and still walked away with everything that was truly his. That's the kind of strength most people never develop. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.